Thank you. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. And at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Daily Mail has today reported that SNP Minister Jenny Gilruth, just sat behind the First Minister, may have broken the ministerial code. The former Transport Minister, who Humza Yousaf promoted to be Cabinet Secretary for Education, changed plans that had been agreed for 18 months with just weeks to go. The original plans would have seen a small closure to rail services around her constituency for a few days just after Christmas last year to allow for essential upgrades to happen. Jenny Gilruth appears to have forced a change in order to give preferential treatment to her constituents at a higher cost to taxpayers and far more disruption to passengers. Does the First Minister think it's acceptable for a minister to make a political decision for her own benefit instead of acting in the interests of all of Scotland?
First Minister.
Can I say to Douglas Ross, he is making very serious accusations indeed. And of course, if there are any accusations of the ministerial code being broken, of course, they will be appropriately investigated. So that is an accusation that Douglas Ross is making, of course, will appropriately investigate it. But I don't believe the way that Douglas Ross has characterised that particular situation to be correct at all. On Sunday, the 21st of May, ScotRail's new timetable came into effect. It will come into effect for this year. This is another important step towards Scotland's railways as it continues to recover. So those timetable changes, well, these timetable changes, of course, happen regularly. In terms of when they happened when Jenny Gilruth was the Transport Secretary, it was done for the correct reasons, certainly from the investigation that I have done this morning, from when this story, as Douglas Ross says, has come into the public consciousness. What I would say to Douglas Ross, of course, we have invested heavily and significantly into the railway services. We have proudly taken ScotRail back into public ownership, and every decision we make, every decision that any Transport Minister under this government has made has been to the benefit of the entire railway network, including, of course, passengers up and down the country. So I don't believe the way that Douglas Ross has characterised the situation is how it has taken place. But, of course, I will investigate the issue further.
Douglas Ross.
Well, let's just clear up some of the things the First Minister said there. He says he's going to investigate, but then he said he investigated this morning and sees no fault in what Jenny Gilruth did. He also questions my characterisation of what happened. So let's just go through some of the pages and pages of FOI emails that we have seen. A Freedom of Information response makes it clear that instead of a few days of closures after Christmas, Jenny Gilruth pushed for changes that would lead to 6 weeks of disruption, including 4 full weekends. Now, Jenny Gilruth is very keen to intervene here, but I'm just reading out what we have received.
Mr Ross, if you just give me a moment. I am absolutely sure I don't need to remind members of the rules regarding behaviour in this chamber. Just be grateful if we could adhere to those, Mr Ross.
Jenny Gilruth seems to have a lot to say about this, so it'd be interesting to hear what she's told the First Minister, because ScotRail advised in these emails that the plans Jenny Gilruth put forward would mean that 9,000 more customers every day would have been disrupted with her proposals. ScotRail reviewed the decision and concluded there would be, and I quote from ScotRail, greater costs with more customers disrupted or inconvenienced with the revised access plan. Jenny Gilruth's decision to scrap these changes appears to have cost the taxpayer at least £1 million. Scottish Rail Holdings board papers, also released under FOI, state this. The board is asked to note that Network Rail and ScotRail chose to do the work at this time precisely to minimise the number of passengers impacted, and Transport Scotland were fully aware and endorsed this approach. So how can Humza Yousaf defend Jenny Gilruth when she went against the advice of Network Rail, ScotRail and Transport Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, first and foremost, whenever decisions like this are made, and I remember well in my time as Transport Minister, it's so crucial that we engage with communities. It's so crucial that we engage with communities to understand from them what the impact of any potential closure will be, Presiding Officer. And I can hear groans from either sides of the benches when it comes to engaging with communities. We always engage with our communities when it comes to any potential disruption to our transport network. And the proposed decarbonisation works on the Vital Rail line would have caused significant disruption right across the whole east coast of Scotland, including for passengers travelling across, yes, Fife, but also Dundee, Perth and Aberdeen too. And the former Transport Minister has stated that she was not content that everything was being done to minimise that inconvenience over a busy festive period, a time when, of course, rightly, people are travelling up and down the country to see their loved ones, particularly in the context also of some disruption that was taking place due to industrial action at the time. And therefore, she rightly, in my view, asked Network Rail to postpone the works, which they agreed to give time to engage with the communities which would be impacted by the closure. So, to conclude, Presiding Officer, for me it's so vital that whoever the Transport Minister is, whether it was Jenny Gilruth previously, the current Transport Minister, that the needs of passengers should always be front and centre when such decisions are made. And that was clearly the case when Jenny Gilruth made that decision.
Douglas Ross.
This is getting worse for the First Minister. He's now saying that Jenny Gilruth was right to do this, and he also said that Jenny Gilruth, as the former Transport Minister, thought there were problems with this. Well, we'll come to another email. On the 19th of October 2022, Ms Gilruth understands why they are doing this, but it's not going to land well. So she agreed with the proposal, but she was worried about how it was going to land with her constituents. She should not even have been involved in this decision. She should have recused herself because of the clear potential for a conflict of interest. Concerns were raised about the Minister's actions. One civil servant, whose name is redacted in the FOI response, said this: "It might be wise to be clear why this is appropriate for Fife in particular, because other areas might expect similar." This political interference may even have forced a senior executive to resign. Chris Gibb worked in the rail industry for more than 40 years. He chaired ScotRail in 2022. He resigned just a few weeks after Jenny Gilruth's decision, after he advised against the change. And in board papers that we've seen, he raised concerns about political interference and, a quote from Chris Gibb, micromanagement by Scottish ministers, advisers and officials. First Minister, did Chris Gibb resign because of Jenny Gilruth's inappropriate actions?
First Minister.
Douglas Ross, once again, Presiding Officer, is making really serious accusations, I'm afraid, without any evidence. And what he is hoping to do, and he'll do this because he is undoubtedly desperate, is throw as much mud as possible and hoping that some of it sticks.
Members.
He will throw as much mud as possible and hope that some of it sticks. And what I would say to Douglas Ross is that conflicts of interest and the Conservative Party are not something, are definitely not a combination that I think he should look to raise. And what I would say to Douglas Ross in response to the emails that he'd read out, of course, he is being selective in what he is reading out. Yeah. What he's forgetting to mention is that this disruption, which would undoubtedly have been caused because of these works, wouldn't just have affected passengers travelling across Fife, but also Dundee, Perth, Aberdeen and other parts of the network too. So absolutely right, I would expect my Transport Minister, I would expect any member of the government to make sure that they are taking account of all of those who might be impacted and all of those who might be affected. So what I would say to Douglas Ross is look at the facts, don't just throw around mud hoping some of it sticks. And speculation, frankly, doesn't help anybody in here, certainly doesn't help passengers that we are committed to improving the rail network for.
Douglas Ross.
You know what didn't help passengers? Was the former Transport Minister's decision. She was emailed on the 7th of November 2022 at 17:40 and told by ScotRail that greater costs and more customers would be disrupted and inconvenienced with the revised plans. At least £1 million extra in associated costs and 9,000 additional passengers every day because of the decision she took. So the First Minister can cut out all that rubbish about standing up for passengers when it's very clear that the decision taken by Jenny Gilruth led to a poorer service. Now, this looks like a clear breach of the ministerial code. Jenny Gilruth is smirking at this, and well she might, because the First Minister already seems to believe she is innocent. But the ministerial code states that you must keep separate the roles of a minister and their role as a constituency MSP. This doesn't just look like there was preferential treatment in the constituency. It looks like a truly awful decision that will cost taxpayers millions and lead to greater disruption. 5 months on, the essential works that Jenny Gilruth delayed have still not happened. This looks like a clear-cut, sackable offence. But at the very least, this needs more than the First Minister looking at this over breakfast. It needs an urgent investigation now. So will the First Minister confirm to Parliament right now that he will launch an investigation into his minister today?
First Minister.
To my understanding, this is not the first time this issue has been raised. I think it has been raised months before as well. Now, of course, I wasn't First Minister at the time. I will, as I said in my response to Douglas Ross's first question, I will look at the accusations that are being made. But what I would say to Douglas Ross, of course, is that Jenny Gilruth was not and is not also the MSP for Dundee, Perth and Aberdeen. These decisions were taken, of course, because they were affecting railway passengers right across the network, and particularly across the north east of Scotland. So with the information that I absolutely have in front of me, it seems to me pretty clear that Jenny Gilruth made those decisions so that, of course, disruption wouldn't affect more passengers right across the network. That is something I would expect Jenny Gilruth to have done at the time. It's something I expect the current Transport Minister to do. When these important, vital works, particularly around decarbonisation, have to take place, how do we do them in a way that they minimise disruption, particularly during the busy festive period? And what I would say to the Conservatives is that we take the issues of the ministerial code extremely seriously. Not something that could be said about the Conservatives by any way, shape or form.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, next month it will be 3 years since the Scottish Hospitals inquiry was announced. And these are the facts we already know. Firstly, 2 children died because of infections they contracted at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Secondly, there were serious failings at Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, which resulted in the Health Board being put into special measures. Thirdly, Louise Lawrence, whose husband Andrew died after contracting aspergillus, was kept in the dark by a cover-up. Despite all of this, the Chair and the Chief Executive of the Health Board still have their jobs, and no one has been held responsible. Now, this week, the Health Board, under the same leadership, has shamefully refused to accept many of the conclusions of the Oversight Board, and they've even called into question the entire basis of the independent review that exposed fatal infections in clinically vulnerable children. So, First Minister, why should people who refuse to accept even the most basic facts be trusted to run Scotland's largest health board?
First Minister.
I say that Anna Sarwar has raised these issues rightly on many occasions, and of course there is, as he has already said in his question, there is already a public inquiry taking place in relation to a number of the issues that he has raised. I think it's important that we don't prejudice an inquiry that is taking place, and of course wait for the outcome fully in terms of that inquiry, and then of course appropriate action will be taken in respect to those issues. But of course it is important, and we have made it clear that we are not waiting for that inquiry to finish, where we can take remedial action, where we can take action to improve the situation, and across a number of areas that Anna Sarwar is right to raise in this chamber, that is being taken. And of course my understanding certainly is that a number of the Oversight Board recommendations have indeed not just been accepted, but work is well underway in relation to some of those recommendations. So it is important that these issues, of course, are raised here by members right across the chamber. My thoughts are with all of those families that have been impacted and have been affected by some of the challenges that the Health Board undoubtedly has faced. But I will continue, and I know the Health Secretary will continue, to engage with Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board to make sure that these recommendations of the Oversight Board are indeed taken forward.
Anna Sarwar.
I think the First Minister misses the point. It's that we are going backwards now, because the Health Board leadership are saying they do not accept many of the findings of the Oversight Board, and they now do not accept the findings of the independent case note review that highlighted these infections. And I think that's the point that the First Minister is missing, because as Health Secretary, Jean Freeman understood that grieving families needed justice. She listened to the voices of families and campaigners and put the Health Board into special measures, and she established the inquiry. But when Humza Yousaf took over, he was too weak and easily led, and he lifted the board out of special measures and empowered those people that failed. Now, less than a year later, the leadership of the board are trying to rubbish the independent review and questioning the accepted facts. Kimberly Darroch, whose daughter Millie Main died, says that the board is making the families' lives hell. And Louise Florence says this: "Enough is enough. Patients have been harmed, others lost their lives. Families lied to and bullied. For what? To protect the reputation of Scotland's flagship hospital and that of the Scottish Government." So, First Minister, will you allow the leadership of this Health Board to rewrite the facts and continue to prolong the agony for these families?
First Minister.
I won't. Of course, we will hold the Health Board leadership absolutely to account in relation to the oversight recommendations that have been made. And of course, the reason why the Greater Glasgow and Clyde were de-escalated in relation to special measures was because the majority of those oversight recommendations were accepted, work was underway, many of them also complete. And that's why decisions around de-escalation were made. In relation to patients and those that have suffered, and of course, Anna Sawar again has raised cases of Millie Main, of course, of Andrew Slorence. In that regard, I'm always happy, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care would also be happy to meet with those families involved. But we have brought forward a number of measures to improve transparency and making sure that families do get the answers when, unfortunately, in those rare cases, things do go wrong, such as the duty of candour, for example. We introduced that organisational duty of candour in April 2018, places that legal duty on all health and social care organisations to be open, to be honest when something goes wrong. The Patient Safety Commissioner that we have committed to as well in terms of the legislation being introduced in response to that important Baroness Cumberledge report. And in terms of whistleblowing, we have made it clear, and I certainly made it clear when I was the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, that whistleblowing is an integral and important tool that should be used by staff in order to raise concerns where they feel it's necessary and where it's appropriate. And I met in my time as Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care every single whistleblowing champion right across health boards up and down the country, including the whistleblowing champion at Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So we'll do everything we can in our power. We'll hold, of course, the Health Board absolutely to account. In my conversations with the leadership of Greater Glasgow and Clyde, they certainly understood the seriousness of the issues here. What we'll make sure we do on behalf of the people of Scotland in government is make sure that when things do go wrong, in the rare times that they do, the vast majority of people will get a good service from our health service. And in the rare times when things do go wrong, we'll make sure that families get the answers that they deserve.
Anna Sarwar.
The First Minister has not held these people responsible to account. He's empowered those people that failed these families. And frankly, staff at the hospital, patients that have been failed and families will listen to that answer from the First Minister with rage and think he's completely out of touch with the reality they face every single day. Because 6 years into this scandal, and the established facts are being denied by a Health Board leadership who are prepared to do anything to protect their own jobs. But this is what we've come to expect from this SNP government. No one ever takes responsibility, and failure is rewarded with promotion. The chair of the Health Board still in his job. The Chief Executive awarded an Excellence in Leadership award. The Health Secretary when the hospital was opened, and when Millie Main died, now the Deputy First Minister. And the Health Secretary who took the failing board out of special measures, now the First Minister. Under the SNP, failure is rewarded, incompetence is excused, and the Scottish people are left suffering the consequences. So, First Minister, if you are too weak to stand up for these grieving families fighting for justice, how can the people of Scotland trust you to stand up for them when it really matters?
First Minister.
Well, I think this is This is the point, is that Anas Sarwar can spin in any way he wishes to do so. But the people of Scotland, of course, have continued to trust the SNP with the Health Service time and time and time again. And why have they done that? They've done that because we've invested record amounts into our health service. They've done that, of course, because we steered this country through the biggest shock the NHS has ever faced in its 74-year existence. They've done that, of course, because our NHS staff are the best paid here than anywhere else in the UK. So we do value our staff. I seem to remember quite well doing a debate here when Anas Sarwar was leading a debate for the Labour Party on health, where, of course, staff at Greater Glasgow and Clyde, doctors and nurses, criticised the politicisation that Anas Sarwar was doing at the time in relation to, of course, the health service here in Scotland. So what I would say to Anas Sarwar is the decision to de-escalate Greater Glasgow and Clyde was made because of the evidence that we had in front of us. I'm happy for him to see that evidence once again and to provide him with detail once again. What we'll continue to do is make sure that, as I say, in the rare times that things do go wrong, we'll continue to make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure there's absolute transparency, that families get the answers that they want. And I am more than happy as First Minister to meet with the families that Anas Sarwar mentions that have undoubtedly been affected by where that failure has happened.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister for what reason only 4% of Scotland's sewage discharge points are monitored, compared with 91% in England.
First Minister.
Our approach to assessing sewage discharges is more effective than that in England. Scottish Water has completed a more extensive environmental study programme to monitor and model the impacts of its facilities on water quality. Data from monitoring is also being used to determine any actions needed to improve Scotland's water environment, and Scottish Water has already invested £686 million since 2010 in improvements and has committed a further £500 million during 2021 to 2027. This has contributed to SEPA's most recent classification, showing that 66% of Scotland's water bodies are in good ecological condition. That compares to just 16% in England. This is in line with aims to achieve 81% by 2027.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
The problem for the First Minister is that the money he's identified for those extra monitors, 70% of all dumping point pipes in Scotland will still go unobserved, whereas in England, every single pipe is due to be monitored by the end of this year. When on earth will we catch up? Look at what we have discovered in the last few weeks. Human waste dumped around Scotland's best-loved beaches, wetlands of international importance and special protection areas from Shetland to the Clyde. And the First Minister should take particular interest in the most used sewage dumping outlet in Scotland. That recorded 127 releases last year. That's enough to run 100 million baths. And he will know that site well because it is on the bank of the Clyde in his own Glasgow Pollock constituency. Perhaps that's why he moved to Broughty Ferry. So can I ask the First Minister, will he commit today to the introduction of legally binding targets to tackle sewage dumping in Scotland? First Minister.
I moved to Broughty Ferry so my stepdaughter could see her father more recently. So that is actually the reason why I have moved there, which is not a state secret by any stretch of the imagination. When it comes to the serious issue that Alex Cole-Hamilton does raise, we know that combined sewer overflows are a serious issue. He is right, of course, to raise them in his question to me. But they are also integral. They're integral to ensuring that sewers don't, during periods of heavy rainfall, back up and then end up flooding homes, they end up flooding businesses, they end up flooding streets right across our country. And our monitoring is more comprehensive, and I'm happy to provide Alex Cole-Hamilton with more detail of this. But in terms of the monitoring that was done by Scottish Water, I've got the detail of it I can send to Alex Cole-Hamilton. It was done over a number of years. And what it does allow us to do is comprehensively monitor where these spill overflows are happening. But Scottish Water isn't just sitting on its hands or resting on its laurels. What it has done has published that improving urban waters route map. That outlines how we intend to invest in Scottish water, in the Scottish water environment. So we have a number of projects that are currently underway to monitor, but also to make sure that we make improvements to our sewer network. So it is an issue that we take extremely seriously, and I would end just on the point perhaps that I started on with Alasco Hamilton in response to his first question, that notwithstanding the very serious issues that Alasco Hamilton raises, of course, our water quality in Scotland is very, very good. It shows SEPA's most recent classification showing that 66% of Scotland's water bodies are in good ecological condition compared to 16% in England, and we are aiming to improve that by 81 to 81% by 2027.
Mercedes Vialba.
Scotland's natural environment is not just the envy of the world, it's also vital to our health. So it's no surprise that reports of more than 14,000 sewage spills have prompted protests across the country, including in Stonehaven in my region this Saturday. Now, in December 2021, Scottish Water vowed to increase storm drain monitors to more than 1,000 by the end of 2024. But according to an FOI response obtained by the I newspaper, as of the 1st of March this year, not a single new device had been installed. So can the First Minister tell us today exactly how many of these 1,000 he expects to see installed by the end of this year?
First Minister.
Again, it was always the plan, of course, that the installation programme would take place over the course of the summer 2023 and then into 2024. And so we are still confident, Scottish Water remains confident that we'll have those 1,000 spill monitors in place by the end of 2024. I'm happy to provide Mercedes Vialba with further detail if she wishes, but I go back to the point that there has been comprehensive monitoring. The studies done by Scottish Water were done between 2015 to 2021. We have very extensive computer models, for example, that can allow Scottish Water to understand when those combined sewer overflows will spill, under what rainfall conditions, for example, and what impact those spills will then have on the natural environment. So there is a whole host of data because of that excellent extensive work that Scottish Water has done. But to answer Ms Vialba's question directly, we are still confident that 1,000 spill monitors will be installed by the end of 2024.
Question number 4, Co-Cap Stewart.
To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the work of the Scottish Government to address potentially dangerous cladding on residential properties.
First Minister.
The safety of residents is, of course, an absolute priority for this Government. We're acting decisively to protect lives through a programme of cladding assessment and remediation. The current programme includes 105 buildings, which will each go through a comprehensive technical assessment. While we expect that the majority will be safe, if that assessment does identify an immediate fire risk, then we will act without delay, as we have already done. As assessments are completed, we will agree plans and take action to deliver full remediation. And this means I also expect developers to take responsibility to remediate their buildings, so the public purse is not needed to do so. While I urge them to do so voluntarily, we will use all of the levers at our disposal, including legislation if necessary, to remediate buildings and to protect residents.
Co-Cap Stewart.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and he will understand that people's lives have been put on hold and some of them are at the end of their tether. Local authorities are asking for building warrants for remediation work. Developers are putting safety measures in place that are severely imposing on the lives of people living in these buildings. And yet many residents in my constituents feel that remediation is not moving quickly enough. So, First Minister, my constituents just want their lives back. What further measures can the Scottish Government take to further encourage local authorities and developers to work cooperatively to remove unsafe cladding from these buildings more quickly?
First Minister.
Well, Co-Cap Stewart is right to make a couple of key points here. One is that the frustration of her constituents, I think constituents perhaps in other parts of the country too, that things do not seem to move as quickly on the ground as they would like, and I understand that frustration. Co-Cap Stewart is also right to mention that we are trying to take a collaborative approach with developers, local authorities and others in relation to this particular situation. I can understand how worrying the situation is for those living in buildings with unsafe cladding. That's why we put the safety and well-being of residents at the very heart of the cladding remediation programme. Developers must also do the same. They must step up and fix their buildings. Our preference has always been that voluntary agreement with developers and getting agreement of the accord. But let me be clear, we are putting the safety of residents first and foremost. We'll use all the powers we have, and I reiterate what I've already said in response to the first answer to CoCab Stewart, that if necessary we'll use legislation to ensure that developers do the right thing so we can get on with remediating buildings in line with Scottish building standards.
Question number 5, Liz Smith.
To ask the